The federally indicted failure, Donald Trump, gave a meandering, incoherent campaign speech in Las Vegas in which he once again revealed that he has no legislative record of which to speak and that his shallow political priorities may energize his cult, but they won't change any life for the better. Intrigued? Then click that like, subscribe, and the alert bell and enjoy the video. So despite the ominous thundercloud that is Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into Donald Trump for the willful retention of national defense information, as well as his involvement with the January 6th insurrection, the federally indicted failure known as Donald Trump continues to try to campaign for the presidency, knowing that it's really his only shot to avoid any sort of, accountability for his litany of various crimes that he has made throughout his presidency and then in life afterwards. He's doing his best. Hopefully his best is not good enough. And to a rational person, if they hear the speech that I'm about to play for you, or a clip of the speech that I'm about to play for you, they would find it woefully inadequate. Okay, because in this speech, or in this particular clip, Donald Trump reveals two things that he consistently reaffirms. Number one, he has no legislative record of which to speak. Right? Donald Trump's biggest successes were a $2 trillion tax cut for the uber rich, which added $2 trillion to the national debt, didn't pay for themselves like he promised that the bill would, as well as young conservative justices crammed into the federal judiciary. But let's be honest, most of the work there was done by Mitch McConnell and the more serious members of the Republican Party. That's basically it. This man failed in every other aspect of his legislative agenda. And he also reveals, cynically in a very low-cunning way, that his political priorities are incredibly shallow. They're not substantive. They're not going to change the financial or educational or health-related dire straits of his conservative base, but they excite the cult because they're spiteful and vindictive and like these weird niche culture war takes. So he reveals these two things, which means that it's important because he constantly reaffirms it. And so we're going to play this clip and unpack the things that this federally indicted failure has to say. So take it away, Mr. President.
We're going to deport the criminal, illegal aliens that have come into our country quickly.
There are millions upon millions, just FYI, I can't remember what the last estimate was, but I think it's like anywhere from 6 to 8 million undocumented migrants that are allegedly, within the 50 states of the United States. It would be impossible. It is impossible and be a colossal waste of resources for law enforcement to try to track them all down and deport them. It's not possible. By the way, all of the economic studies that evaluate even undocumented migrants' impact on the economy all say that they're ultimately a net positive for the economy. So it would be not only a waste of time, it would actually be harmful because their presence here is an economic net gain and not an economic loss. So there's just no reason to do this. This is just virtue signaling of the highest order. Let's continue.
We're going to obliterate the deep state. We were doing a good job. I fired Comey. I fired that sleazebag Comey. We got rid of him. It was bad news. And very early on, somebody said, why didn't you do it fast? I did it right at the beginning. He has a long-term contract. I fired Comey. That was a good one. That's when we found out about the insurance policy, just in case that she lost.
So on that subject, James Comey, of course, was the Republican director of the FBI who announced, days before the 2016 election that he was reopening an investigation into then Secretary Hillary Clinton, who was, of course, running against Donald Trump. That hurt Hillary Clinton's election prospects. That is unanimous among the political science community and really anybody who pays attention to politics at all. Announcing the FBI, the nation's premier law enforcement organization, announcing days before that they're reopening an investigation into one of the candidates is not going to help that candidate with the base. So Trump is citing this as an example. We're going to obliterate the deep state. We started by firing this one person. That's his go-to example, one person. Okay, even if I accept the premise that James Comey was part of the deep state, which I don't, but let's just say I did, that, like any critical thinking member of the MAGA cult, which I suppose is mutually exclusive because you can't be a member of a cult and critically thinking, certainly not MAGA, you would be asking yourself, okay, so you fired one guy. What about I don't know, Chris Wray, the other, the guy you nominated to take Comey's place, who you also say is a member of deep state. You fired Comey, who you say is a member of the deep state, but then replaced him with a guy who you now say is a member of the deep state. So you're at like a net zero, right? Like You didn't reduce the size of the deep state. It's the same size. You took away from the deep state, and then you added again to the deep state. Like, this is what I'm talking. This is so incoherent. But anyway, let's continue.
Hillary. You know, we call her Beautiful Hillary now, right? We changed her name because she's a beautiful woman. We call her Beautiful Hillary. You know why? Because I'm using the word crooked. I don't like doing the same word for two people. We're using the word crooked for...
So real quick, while I was doing that, I thought that maybe the figure I cited for the number of undocumented migrants in the United States was off. And so while he was talking, I just searched, and according to Yale, a study by the University of Yale, there are anywhere between 16 to 30 million undocumented migrants, which also goes to show it is, even if you support in principle the idea, it's impossible. There's no way. You cannot round up 30 million people scattered across 50 states, and it's not like you've chipped them in some way where you can identify them in the first place. It's just impossible. It would be inhumane, it would be cruel, and it would also be economically ridiculous. So this is just empty virtue signaling on his part. And also, can we talk about how weird it is that I understand that Trump is considered like a great brander, but why is he calling, like, it's really weird that he went from crooked Hillary, now I call her Beautiful Hillary, and the reason I'm calling her Beautiful Hillary is because I don't like to use the same nickname twice. Call her another adjective. Why are you calling? It's just so strange.
Joe Biden, because Joe Biden is the most crooked president in the history of our country by a factor of hundreds. He's a crook.
Now, obviously, that could be its own video and has been the source of multiple, or has been a recurring theme in multiple videos. Donald Trump is the most corrupt president, at least in modern U.S. history, and arguably in all of U.S. history. This is a man who did not divest himself of his private businesses. He defied decades of presidential precedent to do that, whereas Jimmy Carter, who was basically a paragon of moral virtue, and a Democrat, of course, the correlation there is strong, he divested himself from his peanut farm. Meanwhile, Donald Trump was a New York real estate billionaire, and he refused to divest himself of his businesses. He made millions upon millions upon millions of dollars during his time as the chief executive of the nation. That's corrupt. He appointed his unqualified kids into high positions of power in order to try to establish a loyal base. That's corrupt. I mean, corrupt. He's had inappropriate relationships with Russia, with Saudi Arabia, and others. Just corrupt. He retained national defense information that he wasn't entitled to have for who knows what nefarious purpose. That's corrupt. That's crooked. The one upshot is, I guess he's finally addressing Joe Biden as the president of the United States, so we're making progress.
We're going to end all of the things you see and ban critical race theory and transgender ideology from our schools, from our university. We're banning it. What they do is so horrible. And, one of the things that I've been talking about, you have to say before anybody, we are going to end men joining women's teams. Let's play. No more men and women.
All right, so I want to play that clip uninterrupted because that's what I'm talking about when I mention the shallow political priorities. He offered nothing of substance. Like, all of these things were culture war takes, from rounding up illegal or undocumented migrants to eliminating the deep state, all these vagaries, all these impossibilities, these impracticalities. Then he talks about, after he meanders his way through calling Hillary Clinton beautiful because he can't call her crooked because Joe Biden's crooked, so the only alternative is beautiful. I mean, this guy's vocabulary is terrible. Donald Trump is in a state of cognitive decline. As much as you want to say that about President Biden, you could easily make the case for Donald Trump. His vocabulary has corroded over the years. Go back and watch an interview with him 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. These two men are worlds apart. And then he finally gets to, we're gonna eliminate critical race theory and transgender ideology. And do you hear the crowd respond? The crowd goes bananas. They go. That's what excites them. They're so hyped about it. And he said this. I think we covered this in a video with one of the videos, the collaborations we did with Luke Beasley. He mentions, he's like, guys, it used to be tax cuts. You used to be excited about tax cuts, right? Which you would, again, in theory, understand, because at least in theory, if I promise that you have to pay less in taxes, that's a material financial gain for you, at least in the short term, right? You can make the argument that, your tax revenue would go to things like roads and infrastructure, which would benefit you in the long run, whatever. You could easily make the case that if he's promising whoever he's talking to tax cuts, Well, yeah, you have a direct financial incentive to be excited about that. What the hell does critical race theory, which isn't taught in public schools, and transgender ideology, what does that have to do with you? How does that affect your pocketbook? How does that affect your physical health? We're going to get them taken off teams. And that right there, that got the loudest applause of all. These people, these cultists are so obsessed with the 1 or 2 or 3 trans athletes in the United States competing on teams that are for the opposite natural sex. Even if that doesn't make sense to you, even if you have questions about whatever sort of potential biological advantage or disadvantage or lack thereof that one or both parties may have, okay. Why is that the thing that drives you? Why is that now your single issue vote? What does that have to do with you? It has nothing to do with you because it's a cult. These people have been convinced to not give a crap about their own needs, their own best interests, right? Because again, as we talked about, Republican-led states are the poorest, the least healthy, the least educated in the country. Republican policies, Republican governance does nothing for nobody. It doesn't even help their own base. It helps occasionally some billionaires. That's it. But the, poor white guy in West Virginia does not benefit from Republican West Virginian governance. He will not benefit from Donald Trump's governance. And so the question is, why do you care so much? Why are you so motivated by hate? You hate trans people so much. You hate minorities so much. You hate, the LGBTQ people so much that you're going to vote this guy into office for a second term, even though he's not going to do anything for you. It's so weird. So anyway, this particular speech is instructive, and he's going to make others like it, and he's going to get similar reactions for it. But it's good to continuously reacquaint yourselves that the MAGA cult has been brainwashed into cheering for policies that have absolutely nothing to do with benefiting their lives. And that's really weird.